Hey guys, on today's episode, I'm not only going to be doing a review of these tools and this rigid Molle panel, I'm also going to be doing a DIY walkthrough on how to install this system. Now, I've obviously installed this on my off-grid trailer, but you can install this on your pickup truck or any kind of vehicle and have the results look professional. If you're ready, let's get started. So because several people asked me to create a video on how you go about installing one of these, I wanted to do that. And particularly, I'm going to be talking about how to install one of these rigid Molle panels onto a flat surface where you don't have access to the other side of the wall. In this case, I've got 2 inches of insulation here. And so I'm going to be using rivet nuts, either rivet nuts or plus nuts for this application, and I'll show you how to do that. And in this case, I'm going to be installing these. This is from Built Right Industries. This is the 9th one of these I've bought. I've been so pleased with them that I wanted to go ahead and install one last one. These are rigid, tough, well constructed, no sharp edges. They've got a nice durable coating, and so I'm quite pleased with these. This is what they call one of their tech panels, and this one is their largest one, and this costs right around $100, give or take. You can look for sales occasionally. And so what I'm going to be putting on here is an axe. This is a medium price, nothing special. I did order this leather axe head cover off of Etsy. A really nice leather craftsman created that. And I'll have links to all of these in the program description. And I've got this hatchet. I think this is a $30 hatchet I got off of Amazon. It's got pretty good reviews. Plastic handle with rubber and is reasonably sharp and durable. And then I've got 2 of these multi-devices, multi-shovels. This first is a really small one from Rhino USA. And these can come apart. Both of these come with a case, and inside of these cases you have additional components so you can lengthen these to the desired length. And these have a little utility tool inside. This one here has a spear slash knife edge and a serrated saw edge. And so you can naturally screw these in. You'll see that these pieces have internal threads and external. So these screw together to lengthen this to the desired fit. And there are other tools inside of these handles. This one, as you can see from my hand as a reference, this is a really tiny one. And here you see a bottle opener, a saw, sharp edges all around. And so this is getting good reviews on Amazon and several other sites. And so this was around $35. And then this is more of a full-sized unit. This was $100. And this is from Tiger, and it has quite a lot of accessories, and the build quality is much higher. So you get not only a larger size, but you also get more durability and more tools here. The build quality is nice. This has stops here. You pull this down to change, and so you can use this as a hoe, or you can extend it here as a shovel. And then it's got a straight edge here and serrated saw edge there. There's a lot to like about this. I have mixed feelings about multi-purpose devices. Often you're compromising any one specific area like a shovel in order for it to do a lot of things. But this seems to be really well made, heavy duty. I think this one can withstand a good amount of abuse. I would say this one, on the other hand, is a light duty. In emergency situations, need to bury a dead body or what have you, it can come in a clutch situation. Hopefully not, but this, on the other hand, I think has the build quality. This thing feels really strong, robust, rigid. It's got really strong points there for those to stop in. So I definitely get a sense that this thing here will last. I'll not take the time right now to show you all of the attachments and such, but there are an assortment that come with this. How useful they are, is up for debate. Probably depends on any given situation. This can be used to break ice or as a hunting tool in a emergency survival situation. It's focusing on my floor, unfortunately, instead of that. But there are several tools like that in the bag. And so you can extend the height of this shovel quite a bit. I'll try to shoot some additional footage here so you can see some of the accessories and the length this can get to. So we basically have a hatchet, small shovel, large one, and this axe, and I'm planning on mounting all of those on this rigid Molle panel. And also from Built Right Industries, I bought their tool attachment accessories here. And so this end will attach to the Molle panel. It's got some screws here, and then this will hold shovels, axes, hatchets, and what have you. It's got the hardware that you need there. If memory serves correctly, I think this kit was around $45 for a pair of these. And you can certainly find cheaper ones on Amazon. It's just a matter of, what your expected abuse of them is going to be. As you can probably see, this is probably some kind of CNC laser cut, really strong and robust, and that tends to be the case. And obviously their namesake, Built Right, they're a little pricey, but I found that if you're looking for something that's going to really last a long time, it's a good investment. But your mileage may vary. You can certainly find a lot of items that will do the same thing cheaper on Amazon. And now as to how I'm going to attach these, here I've got some rivet nuts. These are 1/4 20, and these are plus nuts. I haven't decided which I'm going to use just yet. There are similarities between these. Both plus nuts and rivet nuts are designed to go into a blind situation, and so you drill a hole long enough for that shaft, and then you use a wrench to tighten those up. It pinches up against your sheet metal in this case. Let me show you what those look like. Here is a rivet nut tool. I've really abused this one. And so a rivet nut tool has a shorter thread length there. And you can see this one here. I'll put links to these as well. These came with rivet nuts all the way up to 1/2 inch. And so this really is strong, robust. The nice thing about the rivet nut is that it pinches whenever you pull it tight. It pulls this section up against the metal, and so it's pinching all the way around the full rim, and so you get a nice strong connection. A plus nut is slightly different. You'll notice for one thing that this is longer. That's because the shaft and the threads are deeper into the nut, and so you have to have a longer. And by the way, if you're interested, I would recommend only buying a plus nut tool because you can do either rivet nuts or plus nuts with a longer one, but the reverse is not true. You cannot do plus nuts with the shorter one because it doesn't have the shaft long enough to reach into the threads. And then all of these come with varying sizes here of thread density support. So you got on this particular unit all the way from an 832 all the way up to a 1/2 inch, and then the metric from 4 millimeter all the way up to 12 millimeter. And the same kind of thing here. You just unscrew these and swap those bits out for the appropriate diameter and thread density. So I'll be using one of those, and what you'll notice about the plus nuts is that the reason they're called plus nuts is there are 4 slits here, and they're slightly bent outward. And so when you put the tool into here, it screws in, and as you can see, the threads are all the way out here at this very end. That's why you have to have a longer threaded shaft to do these plus nuts. But when these are closed, it creates a plus sign. These 4 pieces bend inward, and you'll see a plus, 2 on top, 2 on each side. And so the advantage of this is these stick out much further. And so imagine a small hole right here, and these will spread out much further, so you're getting a bigger place of grab on the other side of the wall, but it's only in 4 areas, whereas with these it spreads out across the entire diameter of this, so that you end up with this bent section on the inside and outside crimping down around the entire exterior. It doesn't grab as deeply, but it does grab around the whole side. And so different characteristics, but I will say plus nuts are much harder to find, and rivet nuts are much more popular. So you'll often have difficulty finding the diameter that you're looking for in a plus nut. So as a result, I tend to use rivet nuts most of the time because they're more plentiful. And I will warn you, if you're buying either the tool or the nuts on Amazon, some resellers seemingly don't know the difference between a rivet nut and a plus nut, and they'll often call these one or the other incorrectly. They'll usually call a plus nut a rivet nut. So be careful that you look and see if it is a plus nut or a rivet nut, and that you're getting the one you're expecting. So with that in mind, what I'm going to be doing is placing this up here, determining the location. I'll be, in this case, making sure that I'm avoiding the metal studs. I have aluminum studs in here, and one of the challenges is, you know, where do you drill your screws and place your screws? And as a general rule, I try to distribute them, and so I'll typically put 1 in each corner and then 1 in the middle. So I've got 6 screws that are spread out evenly, so I get good load balancing, weight balancing across those. But there's some situations where you may find yourself needing to skip down, and it can be a little tricky because you'll see that these alternate here, the placement of these. And so sometimes you can't get these to line up exactly depending on what you're doing. So what I do is I mark out exactly where I'm going to drill the screws first, make sure that everything is even and level, and then I drill my holes and move forward. You don't really need a lot of tools for this case. I'm going to be using a drill with some drill bits. I'll be marking my holes with this gold Sharpie because I'm working against this black. Obviously, a black marker isn't going to do me any good. And then I've got this spring-loaded center punch. I highly recommend. I did a video on this. It's a little pricey. I think this one, Starlet, makes some amazing tools. They will last you an entire lifetime, and you'll hand them down to your children. They're just built like a tank, but I think something like this costs around $60. I had it on my wish list for many years until I pulled the trigger, and then once I got it in and started using it, I wish I would have bought it many years earlier. I'll be using some of this painter's frog type tape to hold it in place while I'm getting everything set, marked and such. And then once I drill my holes, I'm going to fill it with some 100% silicone to ensure that it is nice and waterproof. And then other than that, I'll simply be using my Rivet or plus nut tools in order to tighten those down. So there you have it. And with that, I'll get started. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is determining the exact location of where I want to place this. And in my case, I'm going to use some of this tape to tape it up to here to hold it in place while I get everything set and my drill holes marked. Naturally, you want this to be level with whatever device you're installing this on. In my case, my trailer isn't level, and instead of leveling my trailer in order to use a level to level this, I'm simply going to measure from this top plate to this to ensure that it's level with the trailer. Now, it is easier to do this part if you have a second person helping. One person can be holding this up while the other person is determining the location of the screws. But I've installed several of these and have learned how to do it by myself relatively easily. And in this case, I'm simply taking some, looks like it's about 1.5 inch tape. I'm looping it through, taping that section on there, and then I'll be securing this up there. So let me go ahead and get the next piece on there. Okay, so I've got 2 pieces. I've given myself a generous helping of tape to ensure that I have plenty of length to get it right where I want it. Since I am filming this by myself, I can't do this next part with one hand, so I'll have to be right back. Okay, so what I did is I brought this up over and tucked it under this side here so that there's a good strong connection here. And as you can see, you can then take some measurements. I can tell already that that is not level, it's low on the right. So I'll get my tape measure and determine how I need to adjust it. I'm installing this on the low side because I'm going to be installing an air purification system up here. And so I'm intentionally making room here for something that's going to be coming a little later. So next I'm going to figure out the exact alignment. I think I'm going to move it a little to the right. Okay, so I've got the right one set just about where I want it in terms of this spacing and about the right height here. And so now, as you can see, the left side is too high. So I'm going to measure this, and I'm looking at here a little over 8.5, maybe 8 5/8. So I'm gonna have to lower that a little less than an inch. Okay, I've gotten it placed exactly where I want it. It's taped into position. I started out with this as my anchor point, decided this is the exact corner where I wanted this to be. I measured from here to here, and then I undid this piece, held it up by hand, and then with my other hand, I ran the tape measure to compare this distance and this distance. Once I had them equal, I taped that back down, firmly pressed it over here, so that's holding most of the weight. I then measured this distance here until they were right. And now I have it all taped into position. That's exactly where I want it hung. So the next part is to determine where I want the holes. And the most important thing to think about is where the studs are, if there are any that you're working with. And this is where you're gonna have to make some decisions. Normally what I would want to do is I would want to go through studs if at all possible. In this case, I know that these studs are only about around 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch, so not very thick. So the likelihood of me drilling right into the center of one of those is not very good. And if I missed and drill into the side, I could weaken the structure, which I obviously do not want to do. So in my case, I want to go into the bare metal and avoid the studs. Obviously, if you're working with sheetrock, and you can use a stud finder, whether your studs are metal or wood. But in this case, where I have aluminum sheet metal and aluminum studs, that's not going to do me any good. So what I did is I went to the manufacturer's website and looked up photos of where they were manufacturing these walls particularly. And then I determined that there is a stud right here and that they placed the studs approximately 1 foot, about around 12 inches on center. So what I'm going to do is to measure out 1 foot here, center to center, and make sure that I'm not drilling close to that. I know in my case, I only have vertical studs to deal with. I'm not dealing with any kind of side issues, and I don't have any wiring in this. In my case, I can either use plus nuts or rivet nuts. I have enough depth to use either one. So I'm going to be making that decision here in just a bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my measurements, and what you might be tempted to do is to put yours right in the center of this piece. But what you'll notice is that if you travel over to this side, there is this piece exactly in the center. So I've learned through experience working with these Molle panels 8 times previously that I need to be careful and strategic to either go up here or down here, or to shift over one so that these match up. So I've got to make that determination where my 6 screws are going to go. And then typically I'm looking for something fairly close to these 4 corners, but it doesn't need to be up here. It can be down here, or I can't even go one over. In my case, I think I'm going to go probably right around here and then come over to here so that I have some adjustment here. I've got some height adjustment. If I put it like right here or right here, and then I find out that I need to move it up or down a little bit, I'm not going to have any movability there. So if I kind of split this difference between, say, these 2 right here and put it right in the center here, and then traverse over here and put it in the same location, that'll give me about a 1/2 inch of upward and downward mobility. So I can make adjustments as needed. And for me, I have a stud right around here. And so I'm only doing these on these 2 edges. And so I feel like that's good placement. I'm gonna have a stud right over here. And so my holes, I feel like, are pretty good distribution, kind of right in between these studs here. So I feel like that's gonna be good placement for support. So the next thing I want to do is to get my center punch. And if you don't have a spring-loaded one, you can use a hammer and nail. Obviously, I prefer to do this rather than use a drill bit without one and then have the risk of that drill bit walking on me. So I'm simply going to put it in place, push till that spring engages. Gives me a nice deep hole in this aluminum. I don't know if you can tell, but this makes a pretty violent sound. Starlet makes some amazing quality tools, and these things are quite robust. All right, with that, I now have my 6 holes marked and center punched. So now I'm going to go ahead and take the tape off, take this down, drill my holes, and make some progress getting this thing mounted. Now, in terms of the components that will install the Molle panel to the exterior wall here, I first of all have a rivet nut, and a plus nut. I'm going to be deciding between those two here in just a bit. And then you have this bolt here, machine bolt. Now you can obviously use a wood screw too, depending on what you're going into. And Built Right sells a kit that you can get that includes this spacer in aluminum, and it has this piece here, a washer for that to sit inside, and a set of machine screws and wood screws. I've purchased those several times. I've since found that I can buy the same components on Amazon for a little cheaper, and more importantly, I can find varying sizes from 1/4 inch, 3/8, 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. So basically this piece here will determine how far out from the wall your Molle panel will sit. And that's going to be a matter primarily of personal preference, but also depending on what you're hanging on it. There will be times like in this one here, I didn't need much space behind it. And so I used a really small 1/2 inch because all I'm doing is attaching this fuel tank holder here. But there may be other times, like in this back one here, I'm using 1 inch spacer because I wasn't entirely sure what all I would be hanging back here, but it might be some Molle bags, camping bags, and a variety of things where I needed more finger space back behind here in order to latch some Molle buttons and such. So that's going to be a matter of personal preference and how much spacing you think you'll need behind here in order to attach whatever devices you'll be mounting onto your Molle panel. And so I'm trying to factor that into my decision right now. If I go with a plus nut, you can see how much deeper the plus nut is than the rivet nut. And so in this case, the rivet nut is much shorter. And so if I use this longer plus nut, I'm not going to have quite as much enough space to use this size of bolt on about 2 inch for my application. And so if I decide to use the plus nut, instead of being able to use a 1 inch spacer, I'm going to have to go with a 1/2 inch spacer. But if I go with the rivet nut, I'll have enough space that I can go through that and then into that rivet nut. I couldn't tell you in terms of an A-B comparison exactly the load that each one of these could handle. I suspect they would even out a little bit based on those differences, but I think this is going to probably handle more weight. And in this case, since I already know what I'm going to be attaching to here, I know that I only need a bolt head behind it, so I'm not needing as much spacing. So I'm inclined in this situation to go with the plus nut and the 1/2 inch spacer. I would caution you, there are many resellers on Amazon who sell these, but they're plastic or a polymer, and I only buy the aluminum for the strength. So make sure you know what you're getting if you're buying those on Amazon. If you get the ones from Built Right, you know that those are aluminum. So the next thing we need to do is to pick out our drill bit. And in either case, the drill bit would be the same size on these two. And so ideally what you want is a hole that's just slightly bigger. And I even shoot for, you'll see in this case, let me zoom in, you can see that those bulge out there. And what I'll often do is instead of getting one this size, I'll get a drill bit that fits this piece here and then just hammer it in over these, and that will maintain its bulge so that when you begin to crimp that down, it will crimp outward. So I'm going to next pick out the appropriate drill bit size to fit that. So I have chosen an 11/32 drill bit size. I would rather err on the side of slightly too small than too big, so I typically will go a size smaller, and then if I need to, I can then drill it out just a little bit more, another 32nd of an inch if necessary. So I've got a nice divot in there, and as you can see, my drill bit has just a tiny little outdent there where it's easy to place that into my center punch hole so it doesn't walk on me. And that looks good. There you can see the insulation, which is what I wanted to see. Okay, I have some rigid insulation there. Okay, so there are my 6 holes. They look good. Now I wanted to dry fit my plus nut, and in this case I'm finding it's just a little too tight, so I want to pick one size larger, about a 32nd of an inch, drill that out a little bit more so I don't deform the metal and create problems. In my case, I had a 23rd 64th, so this drill bit is only 1/64 of an inch larger, so I'm going to use it and then dry fit and see if this is the right fit. Okay, 1/64 of an inch was exactly what I was looking for. You'll see how that first part slides in there pretty easily. It then hits that bulge and stops. So I'll use a mallet to get that in there the rest of the way, but that's looking really good. Now it's easy to overfill these holes and create quite a bit of mess. And so I've got a small cut on mine, so it will release a small amount. So I'm going to put a small amount in there to help keep it watertight, but not enough to create a big mess. Unfortunately, this is going to take both of my hands, so I'm going to have to set the phone down and I can't record this and show you. So what I like to do is to insert the nozzle head all the way in there and then to squeeze out a portion and then relieve the pressure before I pull it out to make sure that there's not so much that it is leaking out or bulging outside of the hole. I like it to be contained up inside of there. And as always, I keep lots of shop towels on hand and encourage you to do so. I buy these in bulk, these Scott brands on Amazon, and keep plenty on hand. Love those things. I'll put a link to them just in case you guys haven't bought those before. And then another thing that I do is I get these little protective caps on there, put them in place, and they actually do help keep your caulk viscous instead of drying out. Like those, inexpensive. I get those at Home Depot, I think. All right, so this is what I'm looking for. So you can see there is some in there, but not spilling out. What will happen is if you have too much, when you put your rivet tool in there, you'll end up with a silicone on your rivet threads. And that's what happened to this tool. I put too much, so lesson learned, don't repeat my mistakes. And I got too much silicone on those threads. It then worked its way up into the tool and froze it up. And so I'm going to have to replace that, unfortunately. So another lesson I've learned is after I put each rivet nut in, use the tool to get it crimped. I'll clean the threads after each one to prevent those building up and working its way into my tool and ruining it. All right, I'm going to get my plus nuts started on each one of these holes. All right, now that those are all in place, I'm going to use a rubber mallet in this case to get those seated. That's taking a little more effort than I would want. So I'm going to bring out one of these. It's okay if they don't seat entirely in, because once the crimper is done, it should be set. I could vacuum this off, but I think I'll wait until I'm all the way done. There we have it. Next, I'll get my plus nut tool and get those crimped. I've got a 1/4 1/4" adapter on there, so I'm good to go. So the nice thing about this, you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube about how you can do this yourself without one of these tools. And it can be done, but it is a lot more work, and it's easy to get your material seriously screwed up. So in my case, I'd recommend you get one of these. This is my current favorite. You can look that up on Amazon or check my affiliate link in the program description. So next, what we want to do is insert this in here and then use this back screw here. Once I've got it in, I'm going to use that to get it going. And I don't want to tighten it so much that these handles are way far apart, because it'll get really difficult to close those. So what I'm looking for here is to get it enough so that this is medium spaced to about there. And now I'll use 2 hands to start the crimping, and then I'll tighten a little further and keep crimping until it is good and solid in there. But I would advise against screwing it all the way in until these handles are spread all the way out to here. And then you go and try to crimp it, and it's going to take so much muscle strength that you can't do it. Okay, so what I've done is I crimped it down and then screwed it a little further until usually my handles get out to about somewhere in this area or maybe this area. Tighten it down, and then I've done that about 5 times now, to the point that when I push this, it is metal against metal. There's no giving, so I know that thing is fully synced in there. Once it's done, I'm simply going to unscrew this now. This is the problem with the DIY solution. This is so simple to do. If you're using a DIY solution, sometimes your net will start spinning on you, and then it becomes just a nightmare trying to use pliers or something to prevent it from rotating, whereas this tool makes that dramatically simpler. And you can give it a good tug while that's in there, and you can get a sense that that thing isn't budging. It is fully seated. That's what you're looking for. You just don't want it half cinched. That will cause problems. So keep cinching it up until you get to the point that you can tell that thing is not going any further. And now once I get this thing fully out, which is kind of hard to do with one hand, let me get this out the rest of the way. Now that it's out, I'm going to examine it, see if there is any silicone on there, and there is. So I'm going to take the time between each bolt to clean off that silicone off of those threads. Now in my case, after I cleaned those threads, I still felt a little more resistance than should be on it. So I took this collar off so that I could get all the way up to the end of that, cleaned those threads off. Now I'll put this collar back on. I know it's moving freely now. There's no silicone up inside of there to jam up my tool. And I'm ready to move on to the next one. There's no order or sequence you need to follow. Just get all of them done. Okay, so I now have half of them crimped down, and you'll notice when they're crimped, see if I can zoom in there nice and tight, that thing is pressed nice and firm up against the wall, whereas the one that hasn't been crimped yet, you can see there's still some distance there. So when it's fully crimped, that thing should be absolutely crimped up against the edge. In this case, I've got this indestructible vinyl here, and you can even see this coming up a little bit around the lip. That means there's so much pressure on that thing that this is trying to get out from that pressure. So I've got 3 done, and I'll move on and get these last 3 done. And I've cleaned my threads after each of those 3. Okay, so I've gotten all 6 of those crimped down. I've thoroughly cleaned out my tool, and on the last one, I disassembled it, did a thorough cleaning, so that'll be ready for the next job. And next comes the fairly simple part of getting the Molle panel mounted onto here. And in my case, because this is an exterior face, I want to go ahead and squirt some additional silicone up inside here. I'm going to try to get it as deep in each one of these holes as possible. Okay, I now have a small amount of silicone up inside of there in each one of these 6 holes. Now what comes next is you're going to have to hold this spacer on first, and then thread this piece through your hole, through the spacer, and into that. So the first couple are going to be a little more difficult, and then it should get easier as you go. So that's what you're looking at. This piece here goes on that side, and that piece there. And then now I'm simply going to lift it into place, get that screwed into there, and then move on to the other screws. I'm going to get them all loosely fitted first, and then I'll do the tightening once all 6 are in place. Okay, so I've got all 6 of mine installed loosely, and typically what will happen is it's going to have a tendency to fall down on and rest on the top. But what I've done is I've lifted mine up. I want to have some play on both the top and bottom. So you see here, I've got probably about 1/2 inch from the center of that screw to there, and the same there. And so that's what I'm after. So as you can see, I've got about roughly 1/2 inch of clearance from the center of my bolt to the tops and bottoms. So I like to have a little bit of play there. And now that that's right where I want it, I can lift and lower it, but I've got it just about where I want it. So now I'll get that tightened in the rest of the way. I like to tighten these by hand, so I make sure I'm not over torquing anything with my drill. And so you might need to be holding it with one hand or having somebody else help hold it in the right position while you tighten these down. I was able to get just the right amount of tension on these that it was able to hold itself up in place. I try to be careful not to cross thread these, so I start by hand screwing them in, and I use a power driver to do most of the work, and then I torque them up. I don't technically use a torque wrench. I get a feel. I've done enough of these that I know when I've got snug and I'm not risking breaking anything. That's good and snug. It's good there. All right. That is on there good and solid. I could probably hold my weight on it, but I'm not going to take that chance. So there you have it. That's what the installed version looks like. I chose these 1/2-inch spacers, so that gives me just the right amount of room for me to get my fingers back here and a thin wrench, like a crescent type wrench or an open end wrench, and get these bolts tightened down. So now that technically the Molle panel installation is complete, I'll work on getting my mounting brackets and then my tools installed. Now what I'm doing is trying to determine the layout of my tools here, which is ironically the hardest part, getting 3 or 4 tools to all align correctly here. Okay, so there is my first one attached. So now I'm going to get this piece connected into here. All right, so I've got my first pair installed, and so I always install these brackets onto the Molle panel first. And now this is naturally with me installing tools. You might be installing a Molle panel for some other purpose, but in the case that you're mounting tools such as these, then what I advise is to get those installed first, then get these installed, and then you're good to go. Your tool, in my case, this multi-tool shovel, should, based on my measurements now, fit in there, and yeah, there. All right, and so now that's what it looks like here in position. I'll need to use 2 hands to get those clamped down, so let me do that now. Okay, and with that, I have my multi-tool shovel installed. I was able to get a nice fit on there. 2 points, particularly toward the bottom and top, were a nice fit. This is encroaching the ability for that to close a little bit, but it's not bad. It's still locked in place. So there's the first of my tools clamped down. I'm pleased with that. I'm going to move on to my next one. All right, so now I've got my axe mounted, and these are on there solid. There's no moving any of that stuff. Super rugged. Wouldn't want to try to carry my weight on it, but it feels like it would definitely hold a lot more weight than is on there. So now I'm going to put my hatchet right there, and this project will be done. Well, there you have it. The Molle panel is fully installed, watertight, nice and snug. I've got my 3 tools fashioned on there, and it's all very rugged. If I shake these, nothing is really shaking. It's just really sturdy and strong. So that's what I wanted to see. There you have it. If you have any questions about any products or techniques, leave those in the comment section below. I will answer each and every one of those. Check the program description for a list of affiliate links if you want to support the channel. It's much appreciated. Hey, thanks a bunch for watching, and until next time, remember, spread the love.
Just another sunny day in Southern California. It's where the